You are standing in front of your fridge, holding a carton of eggs you paid far too much for, wondering how many of them will turn before you get around to using them. Half of them will. You know it. I knew it too. Here is the thing I wish someone had told me 30 years ago. You can keep a fresh egg good for 9 months, without a fridge, without power, using one cheap thing your grandmother kept under the sink, and it costs almost nothing. This is not a health food trend. This is old Australian know-how, the kind of thing that kept farm families fed through drought, through war, through years when the shops had nothing. It survived because it worked when nothing else did. I found the proof buried in a wartime pamphlet and an old Country Women's Association handbook, and by the end of this, I am going to hand you the exact method, the one you can set up this weekend at your kitchen bench, even if you live in a small flat with no yard at all. I remember the first time I saw it done. I was standing in a cold little dairy shed outside Yass, in the New South Wales southern tablelands, and an old girl in her 80s lifted the lid off a bucket and pulled out an egg that had been sitting there since autumn. She cracked it into a pan, and it stood up like it had been laid that morning. I didn't believe my own eyes. So let me take you back to how I got there, because for most of my life I did everything the expensive way. For years I threw money at the problem without even noticing. I'd buy eggs, buy milk, buy more than I needed because the shop was a drive away, and I'd watch a good chunk of it end up in the bin. I told myself that was just the cost of living. Food goes off. That's life. You buy more. I never once asked how people managed before there was a fridge in every kitchen. Because if you'd asked me, I'd have said they just went without, or they ate less, or life was harder and shorter and that was that. I was wrong. Completely wrong. The people who came before us didn't just survive without cold storage. They ate well. They had eggs in winter, when the hens had stopped laying. They had butter and cheese and preserved meat and fruit that lasted through the lean months. And they did it with knowledge, not machinery. That's the part that got under my skin. It wasn't that they had less. It's that they knew more. And somewhere along the line, that knowing got taken off us. One clever product at a time. Think about it for a second. When the hens stop laying in the cold months, the price of eggs goes up. Every single year. And you pay it, because what choice do you have? But the farmers of a century ago had a stockpile of eggs sitting in their larder that they'd put down back in spring, when the hens were laying so fast they couldn't give them away. They spread the glut across the whole year. They beat the price. They beat the season. I used to think that was impossible. An egg is an egg. It goes off. But an egg is a far cleverer bit of packaging than we give it credit for, and once I understood why, everything changed for me. Here's what nobody explains. A fresh egg comes out of the hen with a natural coating on the shell. The old country folk called it the bloom. Scientists call it the cuticle. It's a thin, invisible layer that seals thousands of tiny pores in the shell, and it keeps bacteria out and moisture in. That coating is the whole secret. It's why a farm-fresh egg you've never washed will last for weeks on the bench without any trouble at all. But the moment that egg is washed, and nearly every egg you buy in a supermarket has been washed and scrubbed on a machine, that natural coating is stripped clean off. The pores are wide open. Now the egg is on a clock. Now it needs the fridge, and even then it's counting down. So the old preservers had a simple idea. If nature seals the egg with a coating, and washing strips it off, then why not put a coating back on? A better one. One that seals those pores so tight that the egg can sit for the better part of a year and still cook up like it's brand new. And that is exactly what they did. Now, before I give you the how, I want you to understand why you've never heard of this, because this is where it stopped being an accident and started to make me angry. For thousands of years, people preserved food with knowledge that lived in the home. It was passed from mother to daughter, from old hand to young one, around the kitchen table. It didn't cost anybody a cent to know it, and that was exactly the problem. Because you cannot sell a family a fridge if they already know how to keep an egg for 9 months in a bucket. You cannot sell them a freezer and the power to run it every hour of every day for the next 40 years if they know how their great-grandmother kept a whole winter's food without a single watt of electricity. I'm not saying a fridge is useless. I've got one. But I want you to notice what happened. We were handed a machine, and in exchange we quietly handed back the knowledge. We stopped teaching it. Within 2 generations it was gone from most homes entirely, and the only place you'd find it was in the memory of someone in their 80s in a shed outside Yass. The convenience wasn't free. It never is. We swapped a skill that cost nothing for a dependence that bills you every quarter, forever. And most people never even noticed the trade was made. Look at your last power bill. A big slice of it runs your fridge and freezer, around the clock, all year. Look at your grocery receipt and think about how much of that food you'll actually throw away. The average Australian household bins hundreds of dollars of food a year. Some of the figures I've seen put it above $2,500 a year per household, straight in the rubbish. That's not a small leak. That's a fortune walking out the door while you're not looking. And every dollar of that is a dollar the old knowledge would have saved you. So they didn't just sell us machines, they made sure the free alternative was forgotten, because a forgotten skill can't compete with a product on a shelf. But here's what they didn't count on. The knowledge didn't die completely. It hid. It hid in old handbooks and church cookbooks and the memories of country women, and I've spent years digging it back out, and I'm about to hand you the best of it. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking right about now. This is all well and good for someone on a farm with a shed and a dairy and a paddock full of hens. But you might be sitting in a 2-bedroom unit in the suburbs or a little flat with a balcony and not much else, and you're thinking none of this is for you. I want to talk straight to you for a minute, because this next part is for you especially. You don't need land, you don't need hens, you don't need a shed or a cellar or a single tool you don't already own. Everything I'm about to describe fits in a bucket or a jar and sits in the corner of a normal kitchen, or in the bottom of a cupboard, or under the sink where you keep the cleaning things. The whole reason this method survived is that it was built for people with almost nothing. It came out of hard times, out of war rationing and droughts and depressions, when families in tiny terrace houses in the city needed it just as badly as anyone on a station out west. It was never a luxury, it was the opposite. It was how ordinary people with no money and no space made a little go a long way. So let me give you the first thing you can do this very week, and it needs nothing but what you can buy at any supermarket. The oldest and simplest version of egg preserving is the coating method, and the gentlest one uses ordinary food-grade mineral oil, or even a light vegetable oil at a pinch. You take eggs that have not been washed if you can get them, from a farm gate or a market, and you rub a thin film of oil over each shell with your hands, just enough to close those open pores back up. Then you store them somewhere cool and dark, pointy end down, in the carton or a bowl. That's it. That's the whole trick. The oil does the job the natural bloom used to do. It seals the shell. And a lightly oiled egg kept cool will hold for months, far longer than a bare egg ever would. People have tested this in their own kitchens, cracking one open every few weeks, and reported good, usable eggs well past the half-year mark. If you can only get washed supermarket eggs, this still buys you extra time, though not as much, because the shell has already taken a beating. Even so, a little oil and a cool cupboard will stretch them well beyond the date stamped on the box, and that date, by the way, is a lot more cautious than it needs to be. Now, doing that alone will save you money and cut your waste, and if you stopped watching right now, you'd already have something worth having. But the oil method is the beginner's version. It's the one they'll let you find easily. The method the old-timers really trusted, the one in that shed at Yass, the one that stood an egg up in the pan after 9 months, is different. It's stronger. And it's the one that got quietly written out of the modern cookbooks. Because there is one more thing you have to understand before I give it to you. and it's the part that made me sit up in my chair when I finally pieced it together. I started chasing this properly a few years back, when a mate of mine, a bloke who grew up on a wheat farm in the Mallee, mentioned in passing that his mother used to keep eggs in what he called waterglass. I'd never heard the word in my life. I thought he was pulling my leg. Waterglass. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But it turned out to be a real substance, and it turned out to be one of the most important household preservers of the last century and a half, and almost nobody under 70 has heard of it anymore. Picture yourself standing at your own bench this week, an oiled egg in one hand and a bowl of butter sitting sweet under cold water, and no monthly bill charging you for either. That is the whole idea behind the collection I put together: Aussie Basics, Deep Thrift, and the full system. It hands you the cool-guardy safe method you can build tonight from things already in your kitchen. The waterglass and salting and dry store tricks that need no freezer and no fancy gear, and a simple 30-day household plan with a printable pantry checklist and a preserving calendar you stick right on the fridge. And here is a free test you can run tonight, before you ever open a book. Take one egg, rub a thin film of ordinary oil over the shell, sit it pointy end down in a cool cupboard, and crack it open in a few weeks. Watch it stand up firm in the pan, and you will know with your own eyes that this works. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And this matters right now, because your fridge is drawing power this very minute, and the next carton of eggs is already on your list. Now let me give you the full method, the strongest one, the one from that shed. Waterglass is the old name for a solution of sodium silicate. It's a thick, slightly syrupy liquid, and when you dilute it with cooled boiled water and put clean eggs down into it, something remarkable happens. The silicate seals every pore in the shell and fills the space around the egg with a barrier that air and bacteria simply cannot cross. The egg sits there, suspended, in a kind of stopped time. And this isn't bush folklore that somebody made up around a campfire. This was mainstream, respectable, official advice. During the First World War and again in the Second, when eggs were rationed and precious, governments and women's groups across the British world, Australia included, told households to preserve their spring eggs in waterglass to see them through winter. I found it laid out plain as day in the old Country Women's Association material. The Country Women's Association was formed here in 1922, and in the decades that followed, those women became the keepers of exactly this kind of practical knowledge. Their handbooks and their cookery columns spelled out the waterglass method step by step, because it was the difference between a family having eggs in July or going without. I dug further and found it in the wartime household economy pamphlets, the ones the authorities handed out when every scrap of food mattered. The instruction was clear. Use eggs that are absolutely fresh and clean and unwashed. Dilute the waterglass, roughly 1 part to 9 or 10 parts of cooled boiled water. Lower the eggs in gently. Make sure they're covered by a good few centimeters of liquid. Keep the container in the coolest spot you have, and top it up as needed. Eggs put down in the spring glut would still be good the following winter. Some accounts stretched them out towards a year. Think about what that meant for a family. In spring, when a dozen hens are laying flat out and you've got more eggs than you could ever eat, instead of that being waste, it was wealth. You put the surplus down in the crock, and in the depths of winter, when the hens had stopped and the shops were dear, you reached into that crock and pulled out eggs as good as the day they were laid. They didn't preserve eggs because they were poor and desperate and had no choice. They did it because it was clever, and it worked, and it broke the grip that the seasons and the shops had on them. Now here's where it stopped being a nice history lesson for me and started being personal. Once I understood how well this worked, I had to ask the obvious question. If it was this good, this cheap, this simple, and this widely known only 2 generations ago, then why has it vanished so completely that a grown man like me had never heard the word waterglass in his life? And the answer is the same answer as always. It vanished right alongside the arrival of the electric refrigerator in every home. As soon as the machine could do the keeping for you, for a price, forever, the free method was no longer wanted. It wasn't taught. It wasn't printed. Within one generation it slid out of the cookbooks and out of memory. Not because it failed, because it succeeded too well and made nobody any money. And that pattern, once you see it everywhere. Because it isn't just eggs. The same thing happened to how we kept butter, how we kept meat, how we kept vegetables through the cold. Every one of those old household skills got replaced by a machine you buy, or a product you buy, or a service you pay for, every single month. And each time, the skill that cost nothing was allowed to quietly disappear. Take butter. The old kitchens kept butter fresh for weeks with no fridge at all, using nothing but a bowl, a plate, and cold water. It's called a butter bell or a butter crock. You pack the butter up into a little lidded cup, and you sit that cup upside down in a small dish of cool water. The water forms a perfect seal against the air. No air, no going rancid. The butter stays soft, spreadable, and sweet on the bench for a fortnight or more. And all you do is change the water every couple of days. Every kitchen once had one. Now you'd struggle to find a young person who's ever seen it. Or take the humble root vegetable. Potatoes, carrots, beetroot, onions. The old-timers kept them for months in a box of dry sand or sawdust, layered so none of them touched, stored in the coolest corner of the house. The sand held just enough moisture to stop them shriveling, and just little enough air to stop them rotting. A crate of carrots laid down in autumn would still be firm in late winter. No fridge, no plastic, no power. Every single one of these is something you can do in a flat, in a unit, in a rented room. A bowl of water for the butter, a box of sand in a cupboard for the veg, a jar or a bucket for the eggs. None of it needs land, and none of it needs a cent of ongoing cost. But I promised you the full method, the strongest one, the one from that shed, and I'm not going to leave you hanging, because this is the piece that ties the whole thing together, and it's the piece they'd most like you to forget. Here is exactly how to preserve eggs the way the old country women did it, the way I now do it myself, using the Waterglass method that carried families through 2 world wars. You need the freshest eggs you can find, and this matters more than anything else. Farm-gate eggs, market eggs, eggs that have not been washed and still carry their natural bloom. If an egg is even slightly cracked, or dirty, or not fresh, leave it out, because one bad egg can spoil the lot. Do not wash them. Washing strips the very coating you want to keep. You need sodium silicate, the modern name for Waterglass. You can still buy it. It's used as a sealant, and it's sold by a lot of hardware and specialty suppliers. And pickling lime, which is calcium hydroxide, works as an alternative that some of the old recipes used as well. Get the food-grade or clearly labeled product and follow what it says. You need a clean container that won't react with the solution, a glass crock, a food-grade plastic bucket, or a big glazed jar. And you need water that has been boiled and then cooled completely, because you want it clean and free of anything living. Now you mix. Roughly 1 part sodium silicate to 9 parts of that cooled boiled water, stirred through until it's even. That ratio is straight out of the old instructions, and it's forgiving, so you don't need to be a chemist about it. Pour some of the solution into the bottom of your container. Then lower your fresh, unwashed eggs in gently, pointy end down, and settle them in without cracking them against each other. Keep adding eggs and adding solution as you go, until every egg is sitting under at least 5 centimeters of liquid, fully submerged, none of them poking up into the air. Put the lid on, or lay a cloth over the top, and set the whole thing in the coolest, darkest spot you have, under the house, in the bottom of a pantry, in a cool cupboard. The cooler and steadier the temperature, the longer they'll keep. Check now and then, and top the liquid up if it drops. And that's it. Those eggs will hold for months, right out to 9 months and beyond if your spot is cool enough. When you want one, you lift it out, rinse the solution off under the tap, and use it like any egg. There's one small tip the old girls always passed on. If you're going to boil a preserved egg, prick a tiny hole in the wide end with a pin first, because the sealed shell can crack in boiling water otherwise. For frying, scrambling, and baking, you'd never know the difference. I still can't get over it. An egg from autumn, standing tall in the pan in the middle of winter. That is the secret. That is the thing that was sitting in a wartime pamphlet and a Country Women's Association handbook the whole time, waiting for someone to blow the dust off it. A skill that fed families through the hardest years this country has ever seen, that cost next to nothing, that anyone can do in any home, and that got quietly buried the moment there was a machine to sell instead. When I finally did it myself, when I pulled that first preserved egg out months later and cracked it into the pan and watched it stand up firm and golden, I felt something I didn't expect. I felt a bit robbed, because this was mine all along. It was yours all along. It belonged to every one of us, handed down through our own grandparents, and it had been lifted right out of our hands while we were being told the machine was progress. So let me leave you with this. You just took back something that was quietly taken from you. Not a gadget, not a subscription, not another thing to buy and plug in and pay for forever. A piece of knowledge that makes you a little bit harder to charge, a little bit harder to worry, a little bit more your own person in your own kitchen. If you're the kind of person who has always had a feeling that plain, useful, common sense know-how got shoved aside so someone else could sell you the expensive version, then you and I think the same way, and you're in the right place. Now I want to hear from you, and I want you to actually do this, because this crowd never speaks up unless I ask. Tell me one thing in the comments. Had you ever heard the word Waterglass before today? And did anyone in your own family, your mom, your nan, your old aunt, ever preserve eggs or butter or vegetables the old way? Tell me what they did, and tell me where in the country you're watching from. I read every one, and half the best methods I know now came from someone in the comments jogging a memory loose. If you want more of this, if you want the old skills dug back up and handed to you plain and simple before they're gone for good, come along with the rest of us doing exactly that. This isn't about following a channel. It's about a growing mob of people quietly taking back the know-how that kept this country fed and clothed and warm long before the bills started arriving. Let me tell you a little something I learned a long time ago. It still works better than anything you can buy in a store today, with no fridge and no freezer, using a method so simple and so forgotten that when I first heard it, I flat out refused to believe it could be safe. It is, and it worked for 100 years. But that's a story for next time, so stick around, and I'll see you there. This video showed you why it works, but my members get the exact egg sealing method, bucket to bench, picking up right where I stopped. Inside the Bush Wisdom Circle, you can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you myself. And you won't be doing it alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click, no risk.